Prime Field.
On January 10th, 2026, a 5'6" guard named Kaleena Smith scored 50 points against Archbishop Mitty, including the final 11 points in double overtime. She did it while navigating 4 fouls, and still finished at 9 for 10 from the free throw line. That single performance captures the recruiting dilemma now confronting the University of Connecticut women's basketball program in the 2027 cycle. This is not a debate about whether UConn can recruit elite talent. It's a debate about which kind of elite talent is most valuable. At the exact moment roster construction begins to shift into the post-AZ FUD era, the central question is structural, not sentimental. Does a blue blood prioritize best player available star power, especially at the guard position, where UConn's identity has historically been forged? Or does the program recruit for roster mathematics, targeting rim protection, rebounding volume, and defensive length, to address projected front court scarcity? Because in modern women's college basketball, championships are built on 2 boards at once. One board measures ceiling, and the other measures floor. And in the 2027 class, those 2 boards are not the same. The evaluation begins with a split-screen reality, the dual board countdown, and the collision it creates inside a dynasty built on precision. That collision is the story, and it starts with the board that has always tempted programs into history, the BPA board. The 2027 class forces UConn into a bifurcated evaluation. On the BPA board, the board of pure talent, the logic is straightforward. Take the player who can define an era, raise the ceiling, accept overlap, solve everything else later. On the roster need board, the board of functional utility, the logic's less glamorous and more decisive. Fix what breaks in March. Protect the rim, win the rebounding margin, add defensive length that survives physical matchups. In the BPA ranking, 5 names shape the top tier. Kaleena Smith at the top, an elite shot creator with gravity. Ivanna Wilson-Manyacka, a 2-way wing built from modern basketball. Haylen Ayers, a 3-level scorer with efficient shooting. Jordyn Palmer, a positionless wing with versatile impact. And Eve Long, a center whose value is defined by defensive anchoring and IQ. But on the roster need board, the order changes. Eve Long rises to number 1 because rim protection is not a luxury in roster math. Wilson-Manyacka becomes the jumbo wing solution because defensive length travels. Lauren Hassel enters the tier as a modern forward option, a debate about floor spacing versus traditional interior defense. Palmer remains a modular answer because versatility creates lineup flexibility, and Smith becomes a different kind of need, table setting and playmaking, in a future without FUD-era orchestration. 2 paths, 2 rankings, 1 program. The tension is not abstract. It becomes real the moment the discussion reaches the simplest, most dangerous question in recruiting. Does a team ever pass on the number 1 guard in the country? That question carries a name, and a set of numbers that refuse to be ignored. The argument for Kaleena Smith is rooted in a principle that has guided elite programs for decades. When the number 1 prospect is available, positional overlap becomes a secondary concern. Smith's candidacy is not built on highlights alone. It is built on high leverage production and a profile that blends scoring volume with playmaking responsibility. In 2 signature January games in 2026, the data shows a consistent pattern. Against Archbishop Mitty on January 10th, she scored 50 points, including the final 11 in double overtime. She recorded 4 steals in that overtime win and executed the 4th quarter and both extra periods while managing 4 fouls. A week later, on January 17th, she scored 45 points against St. John. Vienna and went 11 for 12 from the line. She added 3 steals. The free throw numbers matter because they point to a trait that translates across levels. When efficiency drops, the ability to get to the line sustains offense. Even in a game where Smith shot 35% against Long Island Lutheran, she maintained a perfect 100% mark at the stripe. This is the practical definition of gravity. Even when the shot is not falling at peak rate, the defense still bends. Double teams still arrive, and the structure of the offense changes around her presence. The other pillar of her case is that scoring does not erase ball movement. Through 26 contests in the 2025-26 season, Smith averaged 6.8 assists per game. The profile describes a player who can generate offense and still keep the roster engaged. For UConn, a program built on read and react timing and guard decision-making that matters as much as raw points. But recruiting is not only about what a player can do, it is also about what a roster is projected to lack at the moment that player would arrive. And when the scholarship grid is examined with rigor, the dilemma becomes sharper. A roster can look stacked, and still be structurally exposed. The projected 2027-28 scholarship grids suggest UConn will likely remain competitive on the perimeter, but could be vulnerable in specialized defensive roles. By 2027, the program is projected to have moved beyond the AZ FUD and Ashland Shade era. The core shifts toward the 2025 and 2026 recruiting classes. The projected roles illustrate the imbalance. At lead playmaker, KK Arnold, projected as a senior, anchors the position, with Giovanna Popovich projected as a sophomore. The need level is described as moderate. At scoring wing, the need is low. Players like Ali Zebel and Morgan Shelley, projected as seniors, provide perimeter scoring stability. But the front court is different. At rim protector, the projected need is high. The depth behind Olivia Vicosa, projected as a sophomore, is a concern. Gandhi Malou Mammal, projected as a senior, appears as part of the equation. But the grid still flags this as an acute requirement. At rebounding and size, the projected need is also high. Sarah Strong is projected as a senior. Jonna L. Alfie is a redshirt senior. The math suggests that rebounding volume and interior physicality remain pressure points. The conceptual issue is not whether Sarah Strong can play in the front court. It is whether her value is maximized when she is asked to do everything at once, including anchoring the block against true centers. The grid implies a better version of the roster exists if Strong is free to operate as a versatile point forward, rather than being tethered to the interior as the primary answer to size. This is where the need board becomes more than theory. A true rim protector changes the defensive risk profile of the entire team. Perimeter pressure becomes more sustainable because the back line exists, and UConn's recent high-profile losses against physical front courts have reinforced the same structural theme. Teams with size can force the Huskies into perimeter-oriented offense and can challenge them on the glass. The 2027 class presents an opportunity to alter that profile, but size is not only about centers. Sometimes it arrives in a more modern form, the jumbo wing, built to close the gap between guards and posts. That is where Ivanna Wilson-Manyacka enters the story. Ivanna Wilson-Manyacka represents a specific archetype that can stabilize a roster without dominating usage. At 6'2", she projects as a jumbo wing, a player who provides size, rebounding, and defensive disruption while remaining modular within the offense. Her statistical profile supports that identity. During the 2024-25 season at Bullis School as a sophomore, she averaged 18.5 points and 11.2 rebounds per game. She added 2.3 steals and 1.3 blocks. At the 2025 FIBA U16 AmeriCup, she averaged 18.0 points per game, high for the competition, and recorded 7.2 rebounds per game. Her defensive disruption became a defining data point, 3.8 steals per game, the tournament high. The value for UConn is concentrated in what those numbers imply. 11-plus rebounds per game from a wing-sized player is not routine. It often comes from weak-side pursuit and transition recovery, the areas where UConn has struggled in certain matchups. Her scoring ceiling is real, and it is documented. In a win over the Potomac School, she scored 31 points, but the scouting emphasis described in the brief focuses on unselfishness and a willingness to allow the game to come to her. For a guard-dominant roster, this is functional chemistry. Wilson-Manyacka does not require high usage to alter outcomes. She can defend across positions. She can rebound at a front court level. She can disrupt passing lanes at elite rates. And by adding a physical deterrent on the perimeter, the defense can be more aggressive because coverage has length behind it. But UConn's 2027 wing discussion does not end with one jumbo wing. It continues with a different kind of long athlete, one whose statistical profile suggests point forward capability and unusual rim protection for her height. That player is Jordyn Palmer, and her presence raises a strategic question. Is stacking wings a roster strategy, or a detour away from traditional balance? Jordyn Palmer represents the logic of stacking wings. The philosophy assumes that multiple 6' to 6'2" athletes who can pass, dribble, and defend create matchup leverage that holds up against any style. Palmer's profile is defined by statistical diversity. In the 2024-25 season at Westtown as a sophomore, she averaged 10.5 rebounds per game. She averaged 5.8 assists per game, and she averaged 3.1 blocks per game, an outlier number for a 6'1" wing. In the Paysass State Final against Friends Central on March 2, 2025, she recorded 3 block shots, and her season-long playmaking number remained consistent. The combination is the point. Assists suggest orchestration. Blocks suggest timing and verticality. Rebounds suggest physical involvement that extends beyond perimeter play. Palmer's fit at UConn becomes a lineup concept. With a player who can facilitate at 5.8 assists per game, the offense can shift into more positionless spacing. With a player who blocks shots at an elite rate for her height, the defense can absorb small ball lineups without surrendering the paint immediately. The brief describes a game where Palmer produced 10 points and 6 rebounds in a limited minutes blowout, controlling the interior without needing high volume. That detail matters because it signals impact that is not dependent on shot count. Stacking Palmer alongside Wilson-Manyacka creates a perimeter defense with length and a rebounding profile that can reduce dependence on traditional center minutes. But there is a limit to how far versatility can substitute for true size. The need board is explicit. Rim protection is a high need category, and in the 2027 class, one prospect is described as the most direct answer to that math problem. That prospect is Eve Long. Eve Long is framed in the brief as the clearest roster need solution, a consensus top-tier center in the 2027 class, and the top prospect in Kansas. She provides the attribute that cannot be recreated by committee: traditional size with shot-blocking production. At 6'3", her impact projects into scheme. Pick-and-roll coverage changes when the back line contains a dedicated rim protector. Post-defense changes when the roster has a true anchor instead of undersized forwards absorbing center minutes. The data points in the brief highlight both ceiling and consistency. In a game against Ole the North on January 16, 2026, Long scored 37 points. She scored 22 points in the first half alone. Her season averages include 15 rebounds and 2.7 blocks per game. That 2.7 blocks figure is central to the foul economy argument. A backline shot blocker reduces the need for perimeter defenders to collapse into the lane. It allows guards to stay attached to shooters longer. It reduces emergency rotations that generate late fouls. Offensively, her interior gravity forces defenses to collapse. That collapse creates perimeter openings, particularly relevant for shooters described in the roster projections, such as Zabel and Shade. Her USA basketball resume is also a significant data point. At the 2025 FIBA U16 AmeriCup, Long earned All-Star 5 honors. The implication is not stylistic. It is structural. If UConn prioritizes the need board, Long is presented as the only top-tier prospect who provides traditional, reliable interior size. But the 2027 frontcourt debate is not a single-lane discussion. There is an alternate pathway, one that emphasizes offensive modernization and spacing. That path introduces Lauren Hassel. In a different question, is the program seeking an anchor or a connector? Lauren Hassel is positioned as an alternative to Eve Long, and not simply because of size. She represents a different blueprint for the front court, a versatile forward who can score, rebound, and connect possessions from the high post. At 6'3" to 6'4", her scoring volume is one of the most prominent traits in the brief. As a sophomore, she surpassed 2,000 career points. In the 2025-26 season at Clarksville Christian as a junior, she's described at 25.2 points per game and 11.4 rebounds per game. In a game against Pleasant View on January 20th, 2026, she scored 20 points on 64% shooting, while sustaining her season profile. The brief includes a signature consistency marker. In a loss against a varsity opponent, she scored 33 points and 16 rebounds, identified as her 24th consecutive game with at least 16 points. That consistency is the recruiting argument. A 6'4" scoring profile that travels across games, while also contributing on the glass, creates matchup pressure. Her fit at UConn is described as a high post hub. The connector concept is specific. A forward who can block a shot and then lead a break. A player who can handle the ball, make the correct read, and keep pace with an up-tempo system. But the defensive trade-off is stated in the brief as well. Her 1.3 blocks per game is lower than Long's 2.7. The different signals role. Hassel may not be the primary rim protector the need board identifies as most urgent. This becomes the core of the debate. Hassel offers offensive modernization and spacing. Long offers traditional defensive certainty and foul economy impact. And hovering over both discussions is a reality that UConn's identity has often been defined by guard dominance, which brings the narrative back towards synthesis. Because the 2027 board does not exist in isolation. It exists alongside one more crucial data point, a prospect positioned as a bridge between the two philosophies. That prospect is Haylen Ayers. Haylen Ayers is described as a critical synthesis piece in the 2027 cycle. Ranked number 3 overall, she carries BPA value and also satisfies aspects of roster math through size. The brief frames her as a 6-foot guard whose production indicates both talent and structural compatibility. Her numbers are presented as 18.7 points per game, with 44% three-point shooting at the EYBL Nike Nationals. And the recruitment itself contains a chronological turning point. Ayers is taking multiple visits to stores, including a high-profile trip on February 1st, 2026. That date matters because recruiting strategy is often clarified in the moments where top-tier prospects move from interest to action. A 6-foot guard with elite shooting efficiency functions differently than a smaller, high-usage creator. The size allows defensive flexibility, the shooting forces spacing, and the ranking keeps the BPA argument intact. In the narrative architecture of the 2027 dilemma, Ayers is not just a target. She is evidence that the two boards can overlap. If the program identifies prospects who raise the ceiling while also addressing functional gaps, but the larger question remains unresolved. Because even with bridge prospects, recruiting is still a game of limited scholarships and prioritized leverage. And in this cycle, the brief identifies two distinct paths UConn can pursue, two strategic architectures that shape the post-FUD era in fundamentally different ways. The brief describes the 2027 decision as a referendum on roster construction in the positionless era. One path is the talent overload path. Recruit Kaleena Smith and Haylen Ayers, and lean into guard dominance as the program's historical currency. This strategy assumes elite shot-making can overcome paint deficits. It relies on Smith's documented ceiling, 50 points in a high-leverage game, and her playmaking baseline of 6.8 assists per game through 26 contests. It positions Ayers' efficiency, 44% from 3 at EYBL Nike Nationals, as the spacing engine that prevents defenses from loading up on a single creator. The other path is the structural optimization path. Recruit Eve Long and Ivanna Wilson-Manyacka, and prioritize rebounding and interior defense as the stabilizers of March basketball. This strategy is built on specific numbers that map to specific problems. Long's 2.7 blocks per game as a shot-blocking safety net, and the foul economy that follows. Wilson-Manyacka's 11.2 rebounds per game and tournament-leading 3.8 steals as the length and disruption foundation for perimeter defense. The more UConn board, as described in the brief, likely lives between those poles. Historically, Auriemma has taken BPA guards, then sought fit in the front court. But the 2026 commitment of Olivia Vukosa changes the geometry of the need board. If Vukosa is the foundational front court piece, pursuing Eve Long becomes a debate about twin towers versus surrounding Vukosa with modular wings such as Wilson-Manyacka and Palmer. This is the collision point. If UConn takes the number one guard, the roster math is expected to solve itself around her gravitational pull. If UConn prioritizes size and length, the program is betting that versatility and physical profile reduce the vulnerabilities that have appeared in matchups against more powerful front courts. And that brings the documentary back to its central conflict. In recruiting, the most valuable question is often the most uncomfortable. Is the roster being built for the best version of basketball or for the hardest version of March? The answer is not a single name. It is a strategic identity decision. And that identity decision leads directly to the only place this story can end, the legacy of the choice itself. UConn's 2027 recruiting dilemma is not a typical ranking debate. It is a structural argument about how a dynasty maintains continuity when an era is closing. The brief frames the stakes clearly. The decision will help define the post-AZ FUD era. If the program prioritizes the generational guard pathway, the message is direct. Star power remains the ultimate currency in college basketball, and elite shot creation can bend roster constraints into solutions. In that model, Kaleena Smith's profile, high-volume scoring with sustained playmaking, and a documented capacity to deliver in high-leverage games becomes the central organizing force. If the program prioritizes the structural optimization pathway, the message is equally direct. Championship margins are often decided by rim protection, rebounding volume, and defensive length. In that model, Eve Long's shot blocking and interior gravity, paired with Ivanna Wilson-Manyacka's rebounding and disruptive defense, becomes the framework for a roster designed to withstand physical styles. The most consequential interpretation is the one already embedded in the brief. This cycle is a referendum on positionless basketball. If UConn builds around wings in the 6'1" to 6'4" range, Wilson-Manyacka, Palmer, Hassel, it is a bet that versatility is the most reliable championship trait. If UConn chases the number one guard in the country, it is a bet that the gravitational pull of a generational creator forces the rest of the equation to resolve. Either way, the 2027 class functions as strategic architecture. It is not merely a collection of commitments. It is the blueprint of what UConn believes wins next, and what the program believes must be protected in order to keep winning. And in a dynasty measured by banners, the most lasting choices are often the ones made long before March, when a scholarship grit meets a generational name.
Prime Field!